the summer of 1996, the whole of Belgium was in shock when two young girls who'd been kidnapped, raped and tortured were rescued from a makeshift dungeon below a house in Marcinelle. As the weeks passed, the bodies of four other young girls were found buried at properties linked to the same man.
Some of them starved to death, others were buried alive. These are some of the most horrendous crimes that any criminologist will ever come across.
It was the beginning of a terrible nightmare for the entire nation.
It was such a huge thing. No one could believe that such a person could exist in Belgium. It was unthinkable.
With the help of his wife, Michelle Martin, convicted paedophile Marc Dutroux's unhealthy desire for young girls had turned deadly. The youngest victims who died in his homemade dungeon were just 8 years old.
It is unimaginable cruelty and something that sets Dutroux apart from some other serial killers.
Marc Dutroux, the man dubbed the Monster of Marcinelle, had earned his place as one of the world's most evil killers. It was a case that sent shockwaves across Europe. For a year during the mid-1990s, a Belgian killer had been abducting, torturing and raping young girls, keeping them chained inside his abandoned properties. It wasn't until the summer of 1996 when two of the young girls were found alive inside a basement in Marcinelle that the Belgian public discovered the heinous crimes committed by Marc Dutroux.
Behind the facade of this perfectly ordinary-looking house lay a chamber of horrors. Down in that cellar, it's alleged that Dutroux built a cage to keep his victims. They were locked away like animals, raped repeatedly and mentally tortured.
But this killer's story begins over 60 years ago. Born in Ixelles on the 6th of November 1956, Marc Dutroux was the oldest of 5 children.
His parents were teachers and at one point emigrated to the Belgian Congo, where they taught. But when the crisis erupted in that country, they brought Dutroux back to Belgium in 1960.
His parents eventually separated in 1971, and 15-year-old Dutroux stayed with his mother.
We know that his mother was incredibly dominant, his father was very aggressive, so I think it was quite a hostile environment to grow up in. And I think those attachments, or lack of attachments with his parents in those early years, did play quite a role in the person he became.
Trained as an electrician but often unemployed, Dutroux soon began a long criminal history, including convictions for car theft, mugging and drug dealing.
Dutroux had a lot of contact with the police. He stepped up from car theft into a rather grand form of car theft, which involved shipping quite expensive luxury cars, which he'd stolen in Belgium, out of the country into Czechoslovakia and Hungary.
The profit from his crimes led to Dutroux owning 7 properties in and around the city of Charleroi, 45 miles south of Brussels. By 1983, 26-year-old Dutroux was married with 2 children, but he'd begun an affair with a schoolteacher called Michelle Martin. The 23-year-old would eventually become Dutroux's partner in life and crime, with whom he also had 3 more children. The severity of Dutroux's crimes escalated from theft to sexual assault, and in 1989 he was found guilty of the abduction and rape of 5 young girls, one of whom was just 11 years old.
Marc Dutroux was a predator who selected his prey very carefully. He wanted to choose people who were easy to target in the first place, easy to abduct, but also easy to manipulate once he had them under his control. So he would go for the most vulnerable victims that he could find that fulfilled his desires.
Dutroux's now wife Michelle was found to be complicit in the abductions and served 2 years of a 5-year sentence.
The psychiatrists suggest that Martine and Dutroux, husband and wife, are a classic example of folie à deux, that one egged the other on, and that therefore the sum of the two of them was even more dangerous than one alone.
I think when we look at the relationship between Dutroux and his wife, who was implicated in many of his crimes, it is quite interesting. It's quite possible that some people see her as just another one of his victims, somebody else who was manipulated and coerced by him. And when we look at Marc Dutroux and his behaviour, he is incredibly charming at times, and he can be very persuasive. So it wouldn't surprise me if he'd set out with the intention of recruiting somebody to help him in his crimes, and this is somebody who fell for his charms and went along with it.
Dutroux was released on parole in 1992 after serving 3 years of a 13-year sentence, having shown good behaviour.
I find that extraordinary. You can be convicted of the rape and abduction of 5 girls, the youngest of which is 11, and you can walk out of jail after 3 years of a 13-and-a-half-year sentence.
Georges Wecano, a Belgian investigative journalist, has spent over 10 years reporting on the Dutroux case.
Dutroux is an expert manipulator. He made everyone cry. He made everybody believe that his family had abandoned him. As an exemplary prisoner, he came out very quickly. The prisons are overpopulated, and for authorities, he was nothing more than a car thief.
By the summer of 1995, Dutroux was a free man and living with his wife Michelle in one of his Charleroi homes in the suburb of Marcinelle. On the 24th of June, 2 8-year-old girls, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, went missing from the town of Grasse-Hallange, just 55 miles east of Charleroi.
As there was no ransom request, no information about whether they had been kidnapped, probably they had been abducted by a predator, a paedophile, who, as in most cases, killed his victims to silence them. But who could imagine that a man was going to take away the girls, to keep them alive, locked alive inside a cellar? Nobody.
Dutroux, with the help of his wife Michelle, had abducted the 2 children and were keeping them prisoner inside a homemade dungeon.
Dutroux constructed a cell beneath his house in Charleroi, which was 7 feet long, 3 feet wide, and approximately 5 feet high, hidden behind a very strong, elaborate door, which was then covered with concrete and was hidden in his basement. He put these 2 8-year-old girls, Lejeune and Rousseau, into the cell and kept them there for the next 3 months.
As Julie and Melissa remained locked up in Dutroux's dungeon, his sexual depravity was escalating, and just 2 months later he would abduct 2 more girls, but this time it would lead to murder. On August the 23rd, over 100 miles away on the Belgian coast, 2 more girls disappeared. Best friends, 17-year-old Anne Marchal and 19-year-old Effia Lambrechts, had gone missing while on a camping trip. When the girls didn't return home, their friends instantly alerted Effia's father, Jean.
We immediately had the feeling that something was wrong because she was always open about things. She always said where she was going and who she had seen. She would never not tell anyone and just stay away. That was not what Effia would do.
The last reported sighting of Anne and Effia was at midnight in the central train station of Ostend, a coastal town in northern Belgium. Initially, the local police had dismissed the parents' concerns.
They did not draw up a report. They said they must have gone out. They'll return soon. But during those first days, nothing was done. And afterwards, their friends contacted us. And we went to see the police at Hasselt. They did respond. And at that stage, the police at the coast started investigating. The police then asked questions. If she was, if perhaps she was addicted to drugs or something. My response was that Effia did not approve of those things. She was against it. I did not believe anything like that. But anyway, you start doubting. Or sometimes you start wondering, did I miss something?
Heb ik toch iets overhoofd gezien, maar ja, dat heeft er helemaal niks mee te maken.
And Marchal's father, Paul, went to visit investigative journalist Douglas de Koning to see if he could help.
I remember very well that Paul Marchal came into the office. He pleaded, please put a picture of my daughter on your front page. And I think we were laughing at him. He said, oh God, this poor man, his daughter is sure somewhere partying with some friends and she will show up in a few days.
But Anne and Effia were not out partying. In fact, Marc Dutroux, with the help of a man called Michel Lelièvre, had abducted, raped and murdered the two young women.
They were inveigled into the van that Dutroux used for the abductions. Because the dungeon beneath the house was full of the two 8-year-olds, they chained these two girls to a bed in the rest of the house. When exactly Marchal and Lembrick died, and precisely how, has always been a little mysterious. What is not in doubt is that they were tortured and raped and eventually strangled.
In December 1995, Dutroux was arrested in relation to a car theft. He was convicted and served almost 4 months in prison. During this time, the police searched his Marcinelle home. They were agonizingly close to finding out Dutroux's darkest secret.
Twice in December 1995, on the 13th and the 19th, police searched the house in Charleroi. One of the most poignant and tragic parts of that search, which included a search of the basement, was that the police failed to identify the dungeon. Even more horrifying, the two policemen who searched the house were accompanied by a locksmith who would help them. The locksmith told the policeman that he heard screams. The policeman said, oh, it must be from outside, and disregarded him. The terrible truth is that it was from the two 8-year-olds hidden in this cell, this dungeon.
At Dutroux's house, officers had also found several VHS cassette tapes, but investigators didn't watch them until much later.
There was a home video made by Marc Dutroux, where he was filming the developments in the works in his child cage. This was essential proof that they were on the right track. But for some strange reason, they did this house search and they didn't exploit the information they got from it.
The police mistakes came at a fatal cost. By the time Dutroux arrived back home after his release from prison in March 1996, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo were dead. His wife, Michelle, had allowed the two 8-year-old children to starve to death in the makeshift dungeon.
Dutroux had told her to feed their large German Shepherd dog. Look after him. He neglected to tell Michelle, apparently, to feed the two 8-year-olds in the dungeon. Some say, in defense of Dutroux's wife, that she was so terrified of the whole idea of the dungeon and the fact that they might do something or she wouldn't be able to control them, meant that she couldn't go in, and so she therefore allowed them to starve to death. I've always regarded that as an over-benevolent description of what probably happened. But what I do believe is that between them, They allowed these children, 8-year-old girls, to suffer dreadfully, and there is no excuse in my mind for that.
Dutroux didn't wait long to find a replacement for the two girls. On the 28th of May 1996, he kidnapped 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne on her way to school and locked her in his dungeon. For the next 3 months, Dutroux emotionally tortured Sabine by making her think she was in contact with her mother and father.
She wrote letters to her parents, but obviously he didn't send the letters. He read them. He used what was in the letters to manipulate her, yet she resisted. Despite everything, she did not create that attachment with him.
Dutroux was still on the hunt for more girls. On August the 9th, he abducted 14-year-old Laetitia Delay as she walked home from her local swimming pool, before taking her back to his Marcinelle home to join Sabine Dardenne in the underground dungeon. But Laetitia's kidnapping would be the first step in the dramatic downfall of Marc Dutroux.
By accident, it was an eyewitness who saw her being bundled into a van on that day and got part of the number plate.
The man had seen a suspicious white van driving away from the swimming pool where Laetitia was last seen. A white Renault Traffic with a license plate beginning with the letters FFR. Prosecutor Michel Bourlet began to investigate.
Voilà, j'ai un début de plaque sur telle marque de voiture.
I had the beginning of a license plate and a make of car to work with. There were 20 names that matched, and the police officer said, among these 20 names there is a certain. And he said that with a Flemish accent because he was Flemish. Dutroux. This name sounds familiar. So I asked, who is this Dutroux? He's a man who lives in Charleroi, who owns a white van with a license plate beginning with the letters FFR, who was sentenced in 1989 on multiple abductions and rape charges to 13 years in prison, so he is a high-profile suspect.
Donc c'est un personnage important.
One of the police officers working with Michel had been involved in a separate investigation called Operation Othello, led by authorities in Charleroi looking into Dutroux's movements.
He provides us with all the information from that dossier, which he had been collecting since July 1995. We are currently in August 1996.
La cellule centrale de Bruxelles sur cet individu.
Investigator Michel and his partner Jean-Marc Connerot found even more damning information in the Othello file. The testimony of a man who'd been approached by Dutroux to help him kidnap girls.
He had asked a certain Claude Thiraud from the Charleroi region, who is also a fugitive who needed money. He said to him, "I'll pay you to help me abduct girls." But this guy was a police informant, so he went and told the gendarmerie. There's a guy named Marc Dutroux who lives there. He offered me money to kidnap children.
With such strong evidence, obviously Mr. Connerot and I decided immediately to take major action concerning Marc Dutroux.
Michel and his team were planning a synchronized raid on all 7 of Marc Dutroux's Charleroi homes. If they could find him, it may lead them to missing 14-year-old Laetitia Delhay. And there was a good chance that she may still be alive. But they needed to act fast. On the 13th of August, over 40 Special Ops police officers took part in a synchronized raid on all 7 of Dutroux's properties in Charleroi.
Donc je me trouve là vers 1h de l'après-midi au siège central.
At about 1 in the afternoon, I was at the headquarters of the gendarmerie of Charleroi at the very moment when Mr. Connerot received the news that in one of the properties in Sarre-le-Brousier, Dutroux was found with his wife and the vehicle.
Avec la voiture.
This was the time to act, as it seemed that Dutroux was about to change the license plate on the van.
De changer la plaque du véhicule.
Dutroux, his wife Michel Martin, and an accomplice, Michel Lalièvre, were taken in for questioning. Over several hours of interrogations, all 3 maintained their innocence.
He was consistent in his lies, following each lie by telling another lie. It was a manipulative behaviour, but otherwise he stayed very, very calm.
Belgian authorities had no choice but to eventually release Lelièvre, who denied being with Dutroux on the day Laetitia was kidnapped. But moments after he left the police station in Charleroi, a startling witness account came through.
The neighbours of his property in Marcinelle saw Marc Dutroux and Lelièvre return on Friday evening carrying a child covered by a blanket as they returned to his house, to Dutroux's house.
Lelièvre was immediately rearrested and taken back into custody. As his accomplice's alibi began to crumble, Dutroux's interrogation took a drastic turn.
Dutroux knows that we had proof that Laetitia was in the car, so he says, yes, I was in Beatrice, which he denied at the start. I met a young girl, I talked with her, and then she told me she was tired of her parents. Stories, because there are parts against him and he changes the stories to suit his narrative on the spot. Then, at the same time, Lelièvre said she was with Dutroux, and finally on Thursday, he ends up telling us, now that all of these parts of the story contradict each other, I will give you the two girls.
Qu'ils le contredisent. Dit, je vais vous donner deux filles.
Dutroux pointed to a poster inside the interrogation room of another missing girl, Sabine Dardenne. 12-year-old Sabine had been kidnapped by him in May.
2 days after his arrest, Dutroux confessed and took the police to the basement where Sabine and Laetitia were found alive.
On the 15th of August 1996, Dutroux led the investigators to his property in Marcinelle, where hidden behind a false wall in the basement was the dungeon where he'd been keeping Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhaye locked up.
He pulled down the wardrobe and inside the cage behind was Sabine and Laetitia.
And then we got this, at that moment, incredible news that two kidnapped girls had been found alive in the cage of a person who had been convicted before for this kind of crimes.
It was such a huge thing. All the journalists were on the scene at the time. The news, magazines were there. It is as if there had been a terrorist attack. No one could believe that such a person could exist in Belgium. It was unthinkable.
C'était pas imaginable.
Laetitia, un sourire, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Ne vous inquiétez pas, je vais bien. Merci de m'avoir aidé. Merci beaucoup.
Douglas de Koninck was one of the few journalists who was allowed to enter Dutroux's basement.
We had seen pictures, we had seen images, but being there is difficult to describe because it's like constructed to you wouldn't even put a dog in such a small place. This was really the kind of cage they made to hide guns from the police.
As Belgium awoke in shock to the news that a man from Marcinelle had abducted, raped and tortured two girls over several months, the families of Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhaye rejoiced that their daughters had been found alive.
They are rare occasions when we find the relatives and a policeman or a magistrate has the opportunity to return a child who have been kidnapped in such circumstances alive. It's fantastic, obviously. It is a joy that can be shared with the parents.
Over the next 48 hours, investigators continued to relentlessly question Dutroux. They were desperate to find the two 8-year-old girls, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, who'd been missing for more than a year.
Marc Dutroux was playing a game with his investigators. He knew that he never would get out of prison anymore. He knew that he would be presented as the most famous criminal we've ever had in Belgium. And he wanted to exploit that situation.
He had to be flattered. They had to make him believe that they believed his pitiful story, make him believe that things were not that bad for him. It's true that you were ingenious on this one. You were not caught, and you fooled the police, and here and there. At that point, his ego had been flattered, and little by little he let information slip. That's his attitude.
After 48 hours of this cat-and-mouse game, Marc Dutroux finally revealed to investigators that he had abducted the two 8-year-old girls. Officer Jean-Pierre Adam was in the interrogation room.
As he did not say he had killed them, we hoped they would be alive. We had to go fast. It could have been a matter of life or death for them. They could very well have been left there without food or drink.
But there was no happy ending this time. In the back garden of Dutroux's house in Marcinelle, police found the bodies of Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo.
I'll remember all my life the moment that I learned that we had found the bodies of Julie and Melissa. It was disappointing because we always hoped to find them alive. It was a great moment of solitude. Yeah, I put myself in the place of the parents. For them, it is 100,000 times worse. But even for me and my colleagues, who were looking for the right information, well, we were extremely disappointed.
I can only imagine what the parents of Lejeune and Rousseau must have felt. I mean, not only have their daughters disappeared, but they're allowed to starve to death and are then unceremoniously shoved in a bin bag and buried in the garden. It is unimaginable cruelty and something that sets Dutroux apart from some other serial killers.
Despite the bodies of both girls being found buried in the garden of his house, Dutroux denied both abducting and killing them.
Well, it's not me who took them away. It's not my fault if they died. I was in prison. Yes, that's what he said to me. It's Martin who should have fed them, who did not come to feed them.
The police also found the body of a Frenchman named Bernard Weinstein buried in Dutroux's garden. It's believed that he helped Dutroux kidnap Julie and Melissa in June 1995. Back in the police station, the paedophile soon confessed to abducting another two girls.
In the meantime, we also had a fairly rapid confession about the abduction of Anne and Effia on the Belgian coast.
It was the news that Effia's father, Jean, had been dreading.
To begin with, we were not told anything. Then the police started asking questions. If we had any more people, children, if he'd been involved with more children. Finally, Dutroux also admitted that he had Anne and Effia.
Dutroux pointed investigators to a property in the Jumet district of Charleroi, owned by Bernard Weinstein, the accomplice whose body had just been found in Dutroux's back garden in Marcinelle. On September the 3rd, 1996, near a shack not far away from the house, police exhumed the bodies of Anne Marchel and Effia Lambrechts. They had been missing for over a year. Post-mortem results revealed the pair had been buried alive.
At that time, it was only then that people began to make more or less the connection between everything. No one had made the link.
The nation was completely stunned. Between 1995 and 1996, Marc Dutroux, a convicted child abuser, had abducted and raped 6 young girls aged between 8 and 19 years old. 4 of them were now dead.
For him, his fantasy was to take young girls. He soon realised that Julia and Melissa were sexually too young for him, so he took ones that were a little older. That was Anne and Effia. But he found that they were too difficult to manage because they were older, stronger, more intelligent. There was one that escaped several times. He had to catch her again, and it became unmanageable for him, so he killed them as well. In his crazy and depraved mind, the first ones were too young, the others were too old. He chose in between, so he first took Sabine and then Letitia.
These are some of the most horrendous crimes that any criminologist will ever come across. But this is somebody who just wouldn't have felt bad about his victims at all. He has no sense of connection to them or empathy with them.
Due to the size of the ongoing investigation, it would take 7.5 years before Dutroux, Martin and their accomplice Michel Lelièvre were finally taken to trial. During those years, the sheer gruesomeness of Dutroux's crimes, coupled with the major shortcomings of police investigations, led to widespread protests across the country.
It's as if something falls on your head and you say to yourself, but how did we not see it? How did we not see it happen? Those events deeply shook society. You wondered what we're going to build tomorrow on.
Dutroux's case had grabbed the headlines of every news outlet in Belgium and had become an international story. Belgian society was on the verge of breaking point. The trial against Marc Dutroux, his wife Michel, and an accomplice, Michel Lelièvre, was due to begin on the 1st of March 2004, nearly 8 years after the bodies of 4 girls had been found in 2 properties linked to Dutroux. By the time the trial arrived, the story had become one of the biggest controversies in Belgian history.
Belgian society still remains deeply divided over whether they've got the right people in the dock and just how thoroughly the case has been investigated.
On espère qu'on va trouver un peu la vérité et on espère certainement que c'est possible.
We lived and went to sleep with this trial. It was like an addiction. There were so many pages in the newspaper, so many hours on television.
The prosecution had brought over 200 charges against Dutroux and his accomplices.
There was the kidnapping, the abduction, rape and murder of young girls. So if you multiply that by 4 or 5, so there are roughly 255 charges attributable to him.
The trial began on March the 1st, 2004 at the Arlon Assize Court in southeast Belgium. Dutroux pleaded guilty to the murder of his French accomplice, Bernard Weinstein, but denied kidnapping 8-year-olds Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, and killing camping friends Anne Marchel and Effie Lambrex.
He continued to deny kidnapping Julie and Melissa, and he also denied the fact that he had killed Anne and Effie. But the most important thing, with regards to the kidnapping of Julie and Melissa, he said, "The death of Julie and Melissa is not my fault. I was in prison."
He said one was already deceased and the other practically dead. He tried, he said. That's what he said, to save her, but he could not do it. He could not do it, so he buried them.
As the prosecution began to make its case, the most gruesome details of Dutroux's crimes were laid bare in front of the eyes of the jury and of the families of the girls.
They asked about the photos, how they had been found. Photos had been taken, and I left the courthouse. I did not look at those photos. They were too horrible.
True
that it's very traumatical to be there, because we have to see again everything that was not so easy to see and to accept.
The testimony of kidnapped 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne, now aged 20, described how Dutroux had repeatedly raped her during the 80 days she was held prisoner inside Dutroux's dungeon.
Je me dis qu'il y a plein de gens qui peuvent plus parler, il y a plein de gens qui veulent entendre et ça m'a fait du bien de mettre les points sur les i, vu qu'il y avait eu aussi des histoires il y a plusieurs années comme quoi je disais pas la vérité, ça m'avait pas plu du tout et j'espère qu'aujourd'hui tout le monde m'a cru.
For 14 weeks, the self-obsessed psychopath used the courtroom as his stage, communicating with his captive audience from behind the glass cage where he was made to sit for his own protection.
I started to understand him better just by hearing him talking in direct. For example, one of the moments I never forget was the airco didn't work anymore. It was terribly hot. in that courtroom, and there were some people saying we cannot go through with this. We should stop today and wait until the plumber has arrived. And then suddenly Marc Dutroux knocked on his glass and said, "I can fix it." And he started a whole explanation about what was wrong with the system and how to fix it. And he just had to be released from his box and he would do it.
Marc Dutroux is a textbook psychopath, in my opinion. And when we look at psychopathy, these are people who are not as emotionally complex as the rest of us. They don't have that same depth of feeling. They lack a conscience. They operate pretty much like robots. So they are able to kind of live in the present, to just simply follow their own wants and desires. But I think one important thing to remember about psychopaths is they're not mentally ill. They are rational, they're aware of what they're doing, their actions are the result of choice.
What many found so disturbing was the role of Dutroux's wife Michelle, who became a silent witness and at times accomplice to his heinous crimes.
Michel Martin.
This Michelle Martin, she's a total riddle because she's different. She's not like Dutroux. I think if she had not met Dutroux, she might not have done what she did. And here she also tried to explain. She regretted it. But it's so strange that as an explanation, she was going to feed the dog, and in the house, the kids were downstairs, yet she did not go to them. How can people live with themselves? It's not them who created the horror, but the fact that they can live alongside it.
C'est pas eux qui ont créé l'horreur, mais ils peuvent vivre avec à côté.
Dutroux's defense lawyers argued that he was part of a Europe-wide paedophile network.
It was very weird because Marc Dutroux had changed his lawyers on several occasions, and now he showed up with 4 lawyers, with each a different defense line. There was one saying he's a psychopath. Don't listen to all these stories about networks, criminal organization behind him. No, it's him alone. And there was this other lawyer saying he's part of a big network. He's just the guy who kidnaps girls, brings them to sex parties, and cleans up the mess.
But the jury ruled out the involvement of others, and on June the 17th, 2004, they found Marc Dutroux guilty.
To all the charges that I brought against Dutroux, the jury answered positively.
Question numéro 9, oui. Question numéro 11, oui. Question numéro 13, oui.
Well, there was not much suspense because you could feel how, no matter how the jury was critical towards the official story, it was clear that they would condemn Marc Dutroux for every accusation.
On the 22nd of June 2004, Marc Dutroux was given the maximum life sentence. His wife, Michelle Martin, received 30 years in prison, and Michel Lelièvre 25 years for his part in the crimes. Despite the 4-month trial, there are still many questions left unanswered in the Dutroux case.
For example, the exact locations, as well Julie and Melissa, as Anne and Eve, their parents, until today, they don't know where it happened. And it's crucial because if you want to determine responsibilities, to know what exactly happened, that's what these parents is promised, what they absolutely want, just a convincing explanation of what happened. They never got that.
Ja, ik dacht aan meer gerechtigheid.
I was hoping for more justice, so that we'd know who we were dealing with. And also, what happened to Effia? How was she murdered? And that we still don't know. We do not know the details, so we have never found out how she died.
We hebben nooit geweten hoe ze aan haar einde gekomen is.
Dutroux's wife, Michelle, was controversially released from prison on August the 28th, 2012. She now lives in hiding under protection from the Belgian authorities.
Dutroux asked to be released on the grounds that he'd seen in the light that he was no danger to anybody anymore, that after all they released his wife, why couldn't they release him? The request was refused and he is in solitary confinement.
Marc Dutroux has continued to deny killing the 4 girls, and despite pleas from the families and the survivors, has never given an explanation for his actions. Many people believe his crime spread further and wider, and that there were other accomplices involved, leaving some with a feeling that justice had not been served.
We did not get any answers, and we started our own investigation. We examined dossiers ourselves. We found out some things, but much more is still unclear.
The fact that this was a case of child abduction, this was a case where the violence used against children was so evident, so uncommon, that it was hard to believe that this guy not only was released from prison after only a few years, but managed to find a way to start immediately again with kidnapping girls, buying houses, and he was like everything that could be worse was worse.
Dutroux's crimes not only affected the families of his victims, the entire country was sickened by this deadly psychopath.
Unfortunately, Dutroux is the one thing that Belgium would not want to be remembered for. In the years between 1996 and 98, 1/3 of the Belgian people whose name was Dutroux asked to change their name. It is a commentary on how deeply affected the country was by this lone wolf.
Well, some of the things that Marc Dutroux did were incredibly depraved, and he didn't seem to have any bad feelings about that. He completely lacked any empathy for his victims. He treated his victims essentially as commodities, as items to use and discard when he was fed up with them.
He is depraved. There are no physical signs. He's a man who, if you meet on the street, you'll meet him. He doesn't stand out. But when you analyse his personality, it's that of a depraved man, that's all. An intelligent man who knows what he wants, but is depraved.
He's a psychopath, someone who has no feelings for people. He thinks he can reconstruct his fantasies. He believes that he is going to kidnap 2 girls away and that they will become attached to him and that they will love him. He will grow old with them. One must be seriously disturbed to think that.
Marc Dutroux's hideous crimes left many families in mourning and a whole nation stunned. By manipulating those around him, he was able to satisfy his depraved sexual urges. We may never know the truth about how far and wide Dutroux's network of crime spread, or how many children may have suffered in his homemade dungeon. But we can be sure that Marc Dutroux will never be free to cause harm to anyone ever again.